my great pleasure to welcome on this set Rosie Hurst, founder and director of Impact Limited, and James Hurst, who is head of investor initiatives at CDP. Welcome.
Thank you.
So you are attending, both of you, this 8th edition of the annual event of Novetic. Rosie, first question for you. Is there an after and before Rana Plaza drama in supply chain management for companies?
Absolutely, yes. I think Rana Plaza made a lot of people wake up. Before Rana Plaza, there were some companies who were trying to understand labour standards issues in their supply chains, largely using auditing to try to understand those things. And I think Rana Plaza and the other fires that happened around about that time in Bangladesh made these companies realise that that auditing approach simply didn't work. Both those companies which were active before Rana Plaza and also those companies which were doing very little before Rana Plaza, both those sorts of companies have acted now, and we're seeing much more engagement, much more intelligence being applied to what is a very difficult set of issues.
James, why is supply chain a key issue to preserve natural capital?
Well, quite simply, most natural capital is right at the beginning of supply chains, whether it's water, forests, biodiversity. They're all largely on the other side of the world for developed countries and for the companies that are buying products. And it's incredibly important to understand the supply chain, to understand the impacts of your products on natural capital.
And do you see a connection between the Rana Plaza drama and this natural capital issue?
Absolutely. I mean, in the end, it's a governance issue. It's about managing your supply chain. If you understand your suppliers, if you work with your suppliers, if you visit your suppliers, if you have a relationship with them, then you understand their issues, you understand their environmental impact, their social impact. If you are simply focused on price and you don't care much about anything else, you will have all sorts of problems in your supply chain. We saw with Tesco's, for example, that if you think you're buying beef, you may end up buying horse. All sorts of health and safety, environment, social issues.
Rosie, if I understand correctly what you just said, they took notice, companies took notice, and they are starting to improve. But what could they do to do better, even better?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that the focus needs to shift from compliance with international standards to improving job quality. We talk to a lot of workers around the world, and I have never met a single worker who said, "Ooh, I love my job because it's compliant." Compliance is not attractive from the bottom of the pyramid. What we need to think about is providing better jobs for people, good quality jobs which they enjoy and which are full of satisfaction for them, because then they will be more productive, and then the increasing labour cost stops looking like a cost and starts looking like an opportunity.
James, what are the main criteria about deforestation checked by CDP for companies?
So essentially we're looking at three things. The first is, do you buy any products that are associated with deforestation? And actually we try and filter that out beforehand. So we don't ask every company in the world. We ask those companies in the sectors where we think they're likely to be buying those products. And so you then have two ways of working out whether you may or may not have deforestation in your supply chain and what to do about it. The first is certification. So with things like palm oil, with timber, with soy to a certain extent, you can get certified products. And so if companies are doing that, that's a pretty good start. It's not necessarily perfect, but it's a good start. And then the other way is traceability. So if you can actually trace your product right back to a farm, to a field, then you can go there and you can see what's happening and whether there is any deforestation and follow it through.
And there is a third point?
There is.
Of your measurement? You mentioned 3 points.
So the first one is the products, whether you have the products or not. So we try and filter that out, and then it's all about traceability or certification.
Okay. Got you. Rosie, did the Slavery Act in the UK help your work?
A little, I think.
Can you remind us maybe what was this act?
So the Slavery Act requires companies to report on any activities they may have which are to do, may be touched by slavery. To be honest, it hasn't really taken hold yet. The first deadline is not until next year. But I think all these things concentrate the mind. But what we need to ensure is that companies aren't just playing to the test. We know that companies who play to the test, you tend to have strange consequences from that. We need to make sure that that we prioritize those companies which are really thinking about these things and thinking about how there can be a business case for improving labor standards in their supply chains.
James, how do investors work on supply chain risk? What must be improved as well?
I think a number of investors are doing a huge amount of work. It's probably a small amount of investors, but a huge amount of effort on their behalf. Some are looking at social issues, some are looking at environmental issues, some are looking at all of them. We certainly see organisations like PRI have a palm oil working group now. CDP obviously covers climate change, covers water, covers forests, and we have an awful lot of investors signed up to that and getting more and more educated. I think it's the first thing that investors have to do. These are complicated issues. If they're going to challenge companies properly, they need to understand what the issues are. They need to be able to ask questions that are difficult, and they need to understand the answers as well. And there's a lot of information. NGOs are helping, and investors are working together in collaboration, and I think that's really effective as well.
You're working more on natural capital issues, and you, Rosie, on more human capital issues. Are you getting inspiration from each other's work? Do you talk to each other? How does it work? It's really embedded.
Yeah, it's an interesting point, this. I think that there needs to be more collaboration, I'd say. I mean, I think, thinking about what James was saying earlier, I think just as the natural capital is there at the base of the chain, so is the bulk of the people who are most at risk. And in fact, they are at risk in two ways. One, they're at risk from the depletion of natural capital, and then they're also at risk from exploitation in the supply chain. And certainly working with grassroots NGOs, from our perspective, can be very helpful in trying to attempt to manage both those issues.
Yeah, it's a trade-off, I think, for NGOs, because on the one hand, you need absolute specialist knowledge of particular topics so that you can challenge companies. On the other hand, you need to synthesize all of that, bring it together for both companies and investors so they can understand it. But yeah, there's 1 billion people worldwide that are dependent on forests for their livelihood. So if you're saving the forest, you're obviously saving their livelihoods as well. And if you get involved in some of these issues, things like palm oil and certain other commodities, there is absolutely slavery involved in there. There are land grabbing issues. It's impossible to be involved and looking at these sorts of commodities and these sorts of issues, access to water being another one, and not to look at the social side.
And I think that's where the expertise comes in, because in fact the overlap is over there on the ground. And in the boardroom, sometimes these things seem very, very separate, but if you're an affected person...
The world is the same chain.
It's the same chain, yeah, and you feel it.
Thank you very much, both of you, Rosie, James, for your comments and analysis.
Thank you very much.